Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for your patience as we've had a few technological difficulties that were all pre-checked out this afternoon. So who knows what got into it over the dinner hour. My name is Elaine Didier, and it's my privilege to serve as director of the library here in Ann Arbor and the museum in Grand Rapids. We are delighted to have you here. It's been a long winter, and I think I can feel spring, as can you, and you've all come out for what will be a great program. Before we get started, I'd like to give the standard reminder to please turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. On your chairs, there were survey forms asking how you found out about the program. If you would please fill that out before you leave, we would appreciate it because that helps us figure out how best to reach our audience in the community. In the lobby, we have forms to sign up for electronic messages announcing our programs. If you'd like to receive email messages about future programs, please fill one of those out. And we also have brochures and information about the Ford Presidential Foundation, which is the support group which makes programs like this possible. So we would appreciate your considering joining and becoming a friend of Ford. And the final bit of housekeeping for tonight is that when we go to the question and answer session, if you would please go to the microphone at the back of the center aisle, that will let us have your question on the videotape. Now to this evening's program. Tonight's presentation is one of my favorite aspects of our programming here at the library and the museum, as we're featuring a lecture and honoring the winner of the Gerald Ford Presidential Prize for distinguished reporting on the presidency. This award has been given annually for 23 years and is normally presented at a June event at the National Press Club in Washington. And our speaker tonight received that last June. While the stipend for the award comes from the Gerald Ford Presidential Foundation, the selection of the winner is an entirely independent process. There was a panel of 5 journalists and faculty chaired by Jim Cannon. I've been told that this award is viewed as the Academy Awards of journalism, and so we have, for those who've received it, it means a great deal, and perhaps our speaker will tell you a little bit about that. In winning the 2010 prize for reporting on the presidency, Ben Feller joins the distinguished company of prior winners, and I'll name just a few. You might have heard of Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, Michael Isikoff of Newsweek. Perhaps you've heard of Michael Duffy of Times or Jackie Colmes at the Wall Street Journal. Those are but a few of his predecessors in winning this award. In view of all the developments on the national budget situation tonight, we are incredibly lucky that our speaker was able to come. First, last week we faced the prospect of having to cancel the program if there was a federal government shutdown. So last week was not a week I'd like to remember, and I would not like to experience it again. We got through that, and we hope that is settled. But today we had a little twist because our guest was suddenly supposed to be covering today's speech by President Obama at George Washington University. He does work for a living, and this is the problem. He's kind of fitting us in. But thankfully, he was able to arrange for alternate coverage and to come to be with us tonight. Our speaker tonight is Ben Feller, who is the chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press. And as you might know, the Associated Press is the world's oldest and largest news-gathering organization, providing content for more than 15,000 news outlets around the world and a daily reach of 1 billion people around the world. As a correspondent, Mr. Feller covers all facets of President Barack Obama's domestic, foreign, and political agenda. He is based at the White House and oversees the AP reporters who are also there. He began the White House beat in 2006 and has traveled the country, first covering President George W. Bush and now President Obama. His position puts him in the front and center seat at the White House briefing room and often gets him the first question at presidential news conferences. In winning the 2010 award for coverage of the presidency, his entry featured coverage of President Obama's pre-dawn tribute to soldiers returning from the war in Iraq in caskets at Dover Air Force Base, the story of Mr. Obama's emotional first trip as president to sub-Saharan Africa, and his exclusive reporting on Mr. Obama's choice of his first member nominee to the Supreme Court. The judges for the Ford Award described Ben Feller as a master of deadline reporting and an astute analyst of the meaning and significance of President Obama's initiatives and actions. In all his stories, he displayed insight and resourcefulness and a quality of writing that was engaging and clear. He also won the Merriman Smith Award from the White House Correspondents Association for his presidential reporting on deadline for the Dover story, for which the judges said it had echoes of Edward R. Murrow in its taut, gripped writing. Mr. Fellows' full-time journalism career began in 1993 as a reporter for the Centre Daily Times in State College, Pennsylvania, where he covered local governments and many other beats. He also held positions in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Tampa, Florida, before joining the staff of AP in 2003. His first role there was covering national education issues for 4 years and then moved to the White House. Now we come to the downside. Mr. Feller graduated from Penn State University with a distinguished degree in journalism. As he is a passionate fan of the Penn State Nittany Lions, he is definitely here in enemy territory in Ann Arbor. However, since he has now experienced his first ever Zingerman's lunch today, we do everything we can to sway allegiances. At any rate, this is Ben Feller's first time in Ann Arbor, and he's eager to come back, so it's also his first visit to a presidential library. So please give him a warm Wolverine welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and for that really wonderful welcome. I think I just heard that I won an Oscar. So I will leave here having won an Academy Award and Zingerman's. I'm doing really well, you know. As you just heard, this is my first time at the University of Michigan. And until now, I wasn't even sure you let Penn Staters on this campus. And I am a football fan, and I guess I should thank you. I hear that losses can build character, and so hang on. So I want to thank you for beating us 9 years in a row. We got a lot of character. There was a game in 2005, and Mario Manningham winning touchdown. I don't even want to talk about it. And, this really is fun for me to be able to talk about what life is like in the White House. I have one question for all of you, which is, how many of you are either journalists or connected to the media in some way? Okay, and I know that guy. Well, that's good, because the reason I ask that is what I want to do is tell you about what White House life is like and tell you some chapters of my story there. I'm going to touch on the task and the craft and the real wonder of being able to write on deadline and get into reporting. But what I really want to do is kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and tell you about what life is really like, the real West Wing as I see it. The White House is a truly remarkable place. It's its own museum and its own library in a lot of ways. It's incredibly fast-paced and chaotic office where life and death decisions are made. It's, of course, a house where the first family lives. And it's a place that tourists walk by all the time and just kind of look in and wonder, you know, what's going on in there, and is the president home, and why is the Marine One helicopter taking off right now? And so I have the ability through my job to be able to answer some of those questions. And I'm going to talk about the White House that way. When we get to the question and answer period, feel free to ask me more about the journalism or really anything at all you want. I'd love to hear what interests you. The only thing I won't be able to answer is anything about Joe Paterno. I have no idea. Okay, so let's start with the President of the United States. People want to know whether I really know him, you know, what's he like, you know, does he know my name, do we really get along? And I'm going to try to have some pictures here to tell the story. We get along great. I mean, what's not to like, you know? Got the same suit on, you know? You know, same tie, nice tuxedo. How you doing, Mr. President? Everything's good. Smile for the camera. So, but journalist knows that there's more than one side of the story. So keep an eye on his face there, right? That, my friends, is the presidential stare down. You know, this is this is actually one of the first chapters I want to talk about. This was at a news conference, and this is right in the heart of the healthcare debate. And I had just actually taken over that seat for the first time. I cannot express to you what that environment is like. I mean, I'll try. We're in the East Room, and it's a nighttime news conference, and if it looks like I'm about a foot away from him, I am, And he's elevated, so he's kind of looking down on you. And this particular night, I was asking him, this was right in the heart of the healthcare debate, and people were questioning him for his leadership, which is actually an interesting parallel to what's happening now on the budget and a lot of other chapters. And the president sort of has a pattern of laying out his goals. Congress kind of does his thing, and then in this case, he needed to step in. So we were all pressing him. What are you going to do? And I was asking him, is it are you going to offer some detail, some direction? And then finally, I had to say, is it your job to get this done or not? And he said, yes, I'm the president. It's my job. So we were able to get some news that night. The other telling thing about this particular night was we went through every different aspect of healthcare you could want or not want if you're watching at home. And then at the end, a reporter from one of the Chicago papers asked him about a professor at Harvard who had just gotten arrested outside of his home on disorderly conduct charges. And it was such an unusual moment for President Obama, who is known for, whether you support him or not, he's known for sort of staying on message and being pretty good on his feet. And he said, well, I probably shouldn't comment because I don't have any of the facts, and the guy's a friend of mine. But, the police acted stupidly. And then he went through and described why and kind of went through the whole case. And, that became the story. President against the Cambridge Police Department, and it became an issue of the White House versus local government and race and the cop versus the community. And that was just sort of an example about how high the stakes are. And he got off message for about a week, and he wanted people to be talking about health care, and they weren't. And finally, he came back out like 2 days later and said, I was stupid. I shouldn't have said what I said. I expressed it poorly. But we should all use this as a teaching moment. And then he invited them both for a beer, which extended the story for another week. So, I was tired of that story. So, now, one of the things that people don't get to see before a news conference is a lot of the jockeying that goes on. I mean, if you've ever seen one of these, a reporter like me stands up and tries our best to ask a question that's going to elicit news from the president. But in the case of the Associated Press, we often get the first question, as was mentioned, and so other reporters will try to influence us. I mean, you're not really going to ask about that, are you? Or here's the best way to, if you're going to do that, I've got a better question. So all that jockeying goes on, and sometimes the president won't actually have a news conference, even though they call it that. It's really just one question, and if that goes to the Associated Press, then you're asking on behalf of yourself and the AP, but really the broader press corps as it is. That was the same news conference. This was when the president of China came, and this was just a couple months ago, actually. And this was a perfect example of what I was talking about. The Chinese president got the full treatment, state dinner, and there was a lot of controversy raised about that because of China's human rights record. So one of the conditions was that he had to take questions from American press. The White House insisted on that. And they were proud about insisting on it because it showed that they were on the side of transparency. So I asked President Obama, why is the United States so allied with a country that treats its people so poorly? And I asked the President of China the same question. One of them answered me. It's the guy on the right. And President Obama made his case about we don't support their human rights record, and here's what we think they need to do to be a real player in the world and treating its people. But they're also a power, and we have economic relations with them, and we have to work with people who we disagree with at times. That was the gist of his answer. And then we went through the translation, took forever, and then they just kind of went on. And everybody was confused. Did he skip my question? Did he not hear the question? So there was some jockeying going on. Again, you don't really see that at home, but there was one other U.S. reporter who we knew was going to get a question. And he kind of looked at me like, do you want to ask him again? Or can I get the microphone back? And to his credit, he stood up and said, Mr. President, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask the President of China the question first because we're having trouble with translation. He said, go ahead. And he said, you never answered my colleague's question about human rights. And the President who said, I didn't hear it, but now that you're saying it again, I understand it, which wasn't true because he never even said the question again, and he said, all right. So he says, we treat our people very well, and we're very proud of our record, and, but then in the context of answering, he said, we have a lot of work to do. And it was the first time, the president of Communist China had ever said anything like that. So all of that scene, right, deciding what to ask and the jockeying and getting the microphone back was for that one moment, because we made news. We changed the debate, and we held them accountable, which is the purpose, and that story went everywhere. And just to kind of make it more real for me, my dad was on a trip in the Netherlands, and he was completely jet-lagged and sacked out on his bed in his hotel room, and he's just a political junkie and loves foreign relations, and he's watching this, and he's like, hey, there's my son, And so it was on BBC, and then he heard me ask the question, and the commentator went, oh, right, what an awkward moment, just the question he did not want to have asked, what's he going to do now, And you should hear my dad telling that story to me, and I'm like, well, that's kind of a proud moment, I said, what happened next? He's like, I don't know, they cut to Mandarin, I couldn't understand a damn thing, And actually, the family part of the job is interesting because, again, it helps make all of this real for me. I have two nieces who are getting older now, but a few years ago when I started on the White House beat, I stopped kind of bringing up what I do. I let my family bring it up because I made this mistake with a 9-year-old, and I said, hi, it's Uncle Ben. Do you know what I did today? She's like, yes, you were with the president again. I'm like, okay. I think I should get over myself. Okay. So that's chapter 1, news conferences. I'm going to tell you about Air Force One. Nice airplane. I've actually been on the plane many, many times, all around the country and on foreign trips. Everything from flying on this secretive mission into Afghanistan late last year to actually flying into my hometown of State College, Pennsylvania. And every time, you try to remember as you get on the plane about the majesty of it and the honor of it, but it really is always a work trip. You get on and you're instantly thinking about what you're covering. The press secretary comes to the back of the plane, and instead of doing the formal briefing they do at the White House, they do actually the briefing in the back of the plane. They call it a gaggle. And so you're sort of standing there and trying to hold your spot, and the jet engine's roaring, and you're trying to get answers to questions, and it's all very undignified. But that happens all the time. So, but you still sometimes at night you get home and it's dark and you're at Andrews and Marine One comes and the president gets off and waves and flies off to the White House, and you sort of look at the plane like this. It's a really amazing place to be. So there he is. This is kind of the typical scene where the press is sitting on the side and the president's running up to the plane. There's me in the bottom right looking a little haggard, wheeling my suitcase, not knowing what city I'm in. This is often what happens too. We come off the back side, and the press only has access to this little cabin in the back unless the president calls us up for a meeting to help if he has a statement to give in his conference room. So I think this was on a California fundraising trip, and the president will get off and greet supporters, and then they just tell the press to get out of the way and get into the motorcade, and there's the nice limos and then the big Suburbans, and then there's like these white utility vans, and they stick us back there. So this is one of these days where the president came back, and so basically where he's standing, and to the back there where you see the light, that's the whole extent of the press cabin on Air Force One. So this was at the end of a trip to Asia. It was extraordinarily long trip, exhausting. It was 10 days, but we kept flipping time zones, and we eventually went all the way around the world from Washington. And, of course, we're filing stories and working all the time. So this was at the end of that trip, and we're just, completely strung out and tired, and we were just about gotten home. I mean, you could we're so close you could see the colors on the treetops. And so we had been in the air, including a stopover in Germany. I think it was 15, 16 hours. And he comes back with 5 minutes left and says, hey, guys, great trip, you know. I'll take a couple questions. And we're like, seriously? You know, now, I mean, we all want to talk to you, but now we're just so tired. I mean, you know, there's Ed Henry from CNN with his glasses on, you know, and everyone else is just, we're just completely exhausted. And, you know, my poor colleague of mine, the president, I mean, this all happened faster than I've even telling the story. It's like, okay, what do you got? You know, no warning, and we're just all looking for events. And one of my friends, who I won't name, it says, Mr. President, what can you say about that trip? I'm like, that's your question? You know? But he's like, well, I could say a lot about that trip. And then he talked for a while, and he gave us all a chance to kind of get together. But that's another example of how this job can go. You think that, okay, well, I took Air Force One and you went to Asia, but at any moment things can change. In this case, the president comes back, and he actually ended up making a lot of news here. He talked about the nuclear treaty with Russia, which was pending. He talked about Middle East peace and a big decision that had been made that day by the prime minister. He talked about economic competitiveness and how Asia's going to kick our butt if we don't raise the game. And so, you know, he left, and we landed, and I immediately called in what we call news alerts, 3 bulletins on 3 different topics, and then picked up my laptop and went inside the base and wrote another story. And then drove home, and there was a huge road closing, and so I still couldn't get home. And the woman who's in the foreground here, you can't quite see her, but her car was stopped next to me. We were just in dead traffic, and she just rolled down the window like, this trip will never end. So I'm going to, one other story about Air Force One. This is a few years ago. The guy on the left is actually Peter Baker, who was a fellow former Ford winner. And that's Hans Nichols in the middle from Bloomberg. And I've showed this picture because I'm looking reasonably healthy there and rested, and that's the starting point for a story that now goes pretty badly. This was on a trip to Africa with President Bush, and I think we went to 5 different countries. And on the last leg, somewhere between Ghana and Liberia, I ate something that didn't go well, and I was sleep deprived, and so I started getting very sick. And you know, they said, well, just get you on the plane, and then, you know, the doctors can take care of you. So we take off, and I'm really not feeling well. And one of the press aides says, President wants to see everybody. And President Bush had a great trip. This was late in his term. The people of Africa, every place he went, were so thankful for U.S. aid in terms of preventing disease and education reform. And he wanted to talk about it. So he calls us back, and I sort of sucked it up, you know, and went in and sat down. And the president came, sat down, and then there was 2 seats that were filled by other reporters, and I took the 3rd one. And I walk in, and he goes, "Feller, how you doing?" "You don't look very good." I said, I'm doing okay. And the first lady says, "You don't look good, honey. You know, you don't look good." I said, "I'll be fine." So he says, "Well, this is the best trip I've ever taken." And I was like, wow, that's quite a statement, because he had been on, you know, dozens and dozens of foreign trips. And he starts taking questions, and the first 2 questions are about a guy named Barack Obama, who was running for the presidency, and President Bush did not want to talk about that. He thought it was, you know, wasn't about his trip, and I mean, I saw his point there, but, you know, that's what the first 2 reporters asked about. And so he was getting kind of surly, and he says, you know, "Feller, your turn, you know. Why don't you answer my question? How you feeling, you know?" So what I'm going to read to you now is actually the official transcript of the presidency of the United States. President, : "Yes, Feller, how you feeling, man? I've asked you twice. You're looking a little pale." Me, I'm hanging in there. President, have you vomited yet today? And that's funny, because in the transcript it says laughter. So you can Google it, folks. If you Google Ben Feller and vomit, you will find that story. And it's a high mark of my career. Okay, that's your Air Force One chapter. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Oval Office. This is during an interview that the AP team that I work with and worked for at the time did. This was also towards the end of President Bush's 2nd term, and he was working very hard, very late, to try to secure some sort of progress on Middle East peace. And so he had a conference in Annapolis, and then had the 4 of us in here. And again, it's the same kind of dynamic where you You're at one level sort of in awe of the environment. You're sitting down and invited into the Oval Office, and the four of us there took turns asking questions. And there's just, it's even smaller than you would ever see on television. It has a tremendous amount of power. But at the same time, you're working. You're doing an interview, and all of that kind of goes away for that period of time where you're just trying to get through the talking points and get through the points you've already heard before and get to something that actually helps advance the story and helps readers understand what's going on. So that interview, I think, actually went well. We tried to get him to talk about some other topics, and he was pretty determined to stay on Middle East peace. So we ended up getting a pretty good interview out of that. And, there it is at the end. I can't even remember what we were laughing about. He could have been laughing at me, probably. I love this one because it looks like I'm stealing his TV remote. So there's the Palestinian leader, thinking deep thoughts, and the president's laughing with him about something. And, when you come into these what they call pool sprays, unlike the scene I just showed you where we're doing an interview, when the press comes in this pool, I'll tell you about some more, you just have to try to find some space to stand where you can hear what he's saying. And, after a while, you get to sort of figure out the tricks, and there's a little table here by the grandfather clock, and if you put your tape recorder there, you get great sound, but then you have to grab it on the way back, so without forgetting it. So there's my Oval Office chapter, and that what I just started to describe to you was the press pool. And the pool is the subset of White House reporters who go with the president everywhere he goes. The makeup of the pool is pretty consistent. You've got a network crew, the wire reporters like myself, and some photographers. But the people who are in it always rotate. But the key to my story is that the Associated Press always has somebody in this pool. And the pool's job is to be the eyes and ears of the president to the world when it's not feasible for the entire press corps to go along. So the advantage of that is obviously you're with him and you get to feel it firsthand. And it could take you to some incredibly serious places and then just some silly scenes where you wonder why you're even there. This was a very important day because the president and the vice president went to get a cheeseburger across the river to a place called Ray's Hell Burger in Virginia. And so this was early on in his term, and they just like, okay, let's go get a burger. So they took the motorcade out and cut across traffic. And, they're like, we got to pay for it. So, Joe, you got some money? Yeah, I got some money. So, look at him. And there I am, and look at the reporter there, like, desperately trying to get every detail, write it down. And I'm in the back there trying to not look like, this is below me. I'm like, what are we doing, So what did he say? You got a cheeseburger. Which one? Well, was it a double cheeseburger? No. The president did not get cheddar cheese. Well, I didn't hear what he said. What did he say? So, you think sometimes, what are we doing here? And you come back. But, you get to see all sides of a president that way. Now this one's a little harder to see, but this is at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. And President Bush, the last 2 years of his term were defined by the war in Iraq. And he spent a lot of time going here to visit wounded soldiers, and the press never saw that. We were with him to sort of accompany him to a certain point, and then we would wait out in this lobby, and he would have private moments, obviously, with the wounded soldiers and their families. So, again, you never know when you're going to be called on to take a question, and you always have to be ready. In this particular case, this was when the CIA leak case, if you remember that, about Valerie Plame, was at an important point, and the president was being called upon to pardon Scooter Libby, who was an aide to Dick Cheney and Vice President Cheney, and he took my question about it there and said that he was going to commute his sentence. And that was just a day where, you didn't know if you were going to even see him or whether he was going to speak, but he took the question, and that was a big news that day. And so you can sort of see the contrast. When they call the pool together to get in the motorcade, sometimes you're prepared and you have a sense of what you're going to cover, and sometimes you don't, and you just have to always be ready. This was a night that I'll never forget. It was mentioned in my introduction and was one of the stories that I was very honored to get praise for last year as part of the Ford Award. President Obama was going to, he was in the process of deciding whether to send more troops to Afghanistan, and was coming up at the end of this very deliberate year-long review, forces working on him from all sides, and the war was not going well. And now it was his war, and it was on his watch. This was at a particularly bad or really brutal time for troops. It was the most violent and deadly month in the course of this long war, and a number of soldiers had just died in that week and were coming home in caskets to Dover Air Force Base. So I got called up to the press secretary's office and was told, this is a private trip, don't say anything, but we're going to Dover tonight. And I was in the pool. And so I had a little time to get a story ready, a very quick story that I could hit the button on when the president went airborne, saying the president's making a surprise trip to Dover, and why he was going and what this was about. So that story ran at midnight, and then we took a helicopter alongside his and flew to Dover. And the fact that we were actually able to see this procession of the president standing there and saluting the troops as he went by was unusual, because this had been banned for years for media coverage, and the president and the defense secretary agreed to lift that ban if the families wanted it, if they wanted their lost one to be recognized under full honors. So this was a moment where you really got to feel that no one in the world is seeing this. There was no live coverage of this, unlike a press conference. It was in the dead of night, and it was cold and dark, and there wasn't very little light. The only light around was sort of this yellowish tinge coming across from the lights that were flanking the flight line. And everybody was going to learn about this from the few of us who were standing there. So I was emailing and calling things into our desk to update my story, and then we got to see this, and then he got back on his helicopter, and we got on ours, and we flew back and got back to the White House at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And then I really had to write kind of the final story, which it took me about an hour. And that story talked about mostly what this felt like, because that's really what the story became. And so, all of those put together, you think about what a privilege it is to be able to do the job, and you feel really compelled to try to not just get the facts out, but to really capture it in a way that reflects scenes like this. So now we are on our tour. We are back at the White House. This is the press briefing room, which you might recognize from television. And there's that front and center seat that the AP has had by tradition for many, many years. This is Jay Carney, the new press secretary. This is his first briefing a couple of months ago. And, it sometimes looks like this, a very serious place where we're all trying to determine, journalism. And it looks particularly packed and earnest today because it's his first day, but it's not always like this. If you come into the briefing room at certain times, people are on their iPads, they're taking naps, they're eating where they shouldn't be, and particularly some of the TV crews, they have different kinds of jobs where they are intensely focused on covering the president when there's something to see. But when there's not, they're not reporting. I'm talking about like the camera guys. So it's really the only place for them to sit. So the whole dimension of this room can take on really different feels depending upon what time of day it is and what kind of day was going on there. And that brings me to one of my favorite stories at the White House, which was a recent Friday. It was in December, and kind of a slow afternoon. Everybody was thinking about getting out of there for the holidays. And the president had lost the midterm elections, his party had, and he was trying to get a deal done with Republicans and that he could get through. The Democrats were still running Congress, but he needed Republican support. So he was trying to get a deal through, and that would, involve taxes and unemployment insurance. And we're all trying to figure out what's going on. And we saw on the schedule that President Clinton was coming by to talk to him. So we're like, well, what kind of access are we going to have? Is the pool going to come in for a statement? Are you going to have photographers in there? Are they going to come out and talk to us? And they said, no coverage at all. So we wrote a little story saying that President Clinton was here and they were conferring, probably getting advice on how to handle the situation, but we didn't expect to see anything. then Bill Clinton decided he wanted to talk a little bit. So, he comes out, and there I am, scribbling away in the front row, And, the way this went down was even more remarkable than it seemed, because what we heard was, every available reporter get to the briefing room right now. I was like, oh my God. So we all go running in, and okay, Clinton's coming out. Oh, Clinton and Obama are coming out. Okay, so it's like 4:30 in the afternoon or so. So we sit there, and, President Clinton was pretty quickly back in his element. And first, President Obama says, well, I'd like to introduce this other guy. You might recognize him. You may remember him from the heady days of balanced budgets. Anyway, I just want him to, be able to say a few words. And Clinton's like, I'm glad to be back here. I miss you. And so he starts taking command of the scene, and President Obama says, well, I've got to go. My wife's waiting at a Christmas party, and he's just like, well, you're going to leave me out here by myself? All right. George, how you doing? And he starts just taking over this room, and we're like, wow, so, quiet afternoon, no coverage to that, all of a sudden, And it just kept getting better and better, And we're just, the reporters in the room were just soaking this in, because, the news, if you will, that happened there was President Clinton came out and said, President Obama cut this tax deal with Republicans, compromise has to happen. We got a lot out of it. It's good for the country. Everybody should get off his back. That was the gist. And we reported that quickly. We sent out, news alert. But it became pretty apparent that the real story was what was going on here, that this was a moment. This was one of these political moments that was unscripted, and it felt real, and it felt funny, and it was interesting. And you don't get that as much in the White House anymore. So check that out. That's what it felt like. And you couldn't really make it up, because President Clinton was saying things like, I studied the economy every day. Like, why? Why still, that's his job. So it was just a great moment, and we all had fun covering that. So the couple other chapters I wanted to talk about were the more, I guess what I would call personal stories. This was a hot day in the summer a couple years ago, and we're out on the South Lawn there. And if you can't tell, that's an old-fashioned Carnival dunking tank. And the press secretary at the time, Robert Gibbs, had said in a briefing that this carnival was going on. It was a summer celebration. I think they were having families of the staff and lawmakers there. And somebody made some comment like, well, are you going to sit in the tank? And he's like, well, maybe we can talk about that, And then it kind of became a running joke in the press room, like, are you going to let us take our shots? And so sure enough, he's like, what the hell, I'll go out there. So he put on a full-on wetsuit and sat out here, and they did this, every reporter who wants to see Robert Gibbs sit on a dunk tank, gather by the door. So we all gather up, and we actually walk out the press room, and you go past the Rose Garden, and on framing the Rose Garden is the Oval Office. And there's kind of a slew of doors there, and President Obama peeks his head out. He's like, what's going on? And we're like, we're going to go dunk Gibbs. You want to watch? He's like, no, I don't want to. So we come out, and the first reporter to take a shot was Lynn Sweet, who's this really wonderful, acerbic reporter from Chicago, and she just took 3 shots with the softballs, and she missed. So the bar was kind of low, and then I went next. And, I moved back, I don't know, I was like 15 feet or something. But what you can't see is that the target was on this this yellow target. It actually was kind of small. I'm not trying to build this up, but this was not, And then it was midnight, and I couldn't see anything. So I take the first shot, and I just throw it really hard, and I completely miss. And everyone goes, boo! I'm like, oh, my God, this is terrible. So then the second one, I threw it, and I almost hit the target. And I thought, well, if I just bring it down and to the left a little bit, I'll nail it. And then I'm like, what am I talking about? Like, I can't control my pitches, you know. I barely made the varsity team. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to throw it one more time. So I aimed and fired, and I hit it dead on, and he went down, you know. And he's actually in the tank in the shot. This is why I love it, because you can see me following through and starting to smile, you know, and Gibbs is down in that water. And this is also available on the internet. You don't have to search vomit, you know, just search like Gibbs in dunk tank. And he was a really good sport about it, and it was fun. And then I was feeling great about myself because we had this great moment. And then Bill Plant, who's been at CBS forever, just picked up one of the songs. I was like, I don't see what the big deal is, and dunked him again. You know, one shot, wasn't even aiming, and walked away. But this was a pretty fun day. I think there's one more shot here. Yeah, I went up to shake his hand, and he kind of tried to pull me in. And I guess one of the stories about this is that there are occasional moments where it's just a tense place to work. It really is. And the White House is working very hard to run the country, but also to push its agenda. And there are a lot of us in there who are working very hard to cover it fairly and honestly. And there's a tremendous collision there at times of interest. And the hours get very long, and you never know when you're going to work. And so every once in a while, it's good to have a release like this. And I think he knew it, and everybody kind of got the point that day. This is another personal story I had. This was in China, and I had spent a lot of time pitching a story to the White House about President Bush's other side. I mean, he was so sort of entrenched at that point of his presidency. Again, whether you like him or not, he was a polarizing figure, and he didn't provide as much access to the press. And I always wanted to tell the story about what he did on the weekends, because unlike President Obama, President Bush, you just never saw him. I mean, he would just stay inside. Or he would occasionally go play golf, but he didn't even really play golf at the end. And so I said, well, what is he doing? You know, is he reading? Is he, you know, because they didn't have young kids like the Obamas do, you know. And they said, well, he spends a lot of time, you know, he'll work in the morning or exercise in the morning, and then he'll just, you know, watch a baseball game. And he loved baseball. He owned a baseball team, and that was how he relaxed. I said, well, that's a great story. You should just let me in one day, and I'll watch a game with him. So I tried that, and I made the pitch to the communications director, and I got really close. And they even talked about it, I'm told, one day on Marine One. And he's like, you know, Feller's out there. He's still trying to get you to do this baseball story. And Bush is like, do you know baseball? You know, I was like, yeah, he knows baseball. I'm like, wait. I'm like, he's quizzing me? He's like, yeah, he was checking out your credentials. I'm like, well, what did he ask? He's like, well, is he an American League guy or a National League guy? you know. Does he know what it means to, like, hit behind the runner, move the runner over? I'm like, yes, I know what it means to hit the runner over. So, but I couldn't get the interview. And then this is at the Olympics, and he's watching an exhibition U.S.-China baseball game. And the press secretary on the far right there, Dana Perino, saw me, and she's like, Ben, come on over. This is your time. So I come over, and I think the first lady was behind us, and there's the chief of staff at the time, Josh Bolton, on the left. And we just sat and chatted about life for about 15 minutes. You know, he was at the Olympics, and he was having a great time. And it was actually a very odd time because there was a new onset of war in Georgia, Russia-Georgia conflict, and so he was sort of watching over that, and then going down and watching the volleyball team play, and then he would put his tie on and make a statement, and then he would come watch a baseball game, and he was trying to work a parallel agenda, and that happens a lot in our jobs, and watching him do his job. So, but I eventually got to sit and chat with the president about sports, and that was a fun moment. This is sort of coming to the end here, the personal stories. That's my mom. I took her to the White House. This is one of those, again, those rare days once a year where the White House lets down its guard and invites the press to try to look presentable and be presentable and come to this Christmas party. And the Obamas and the Bushes before them were both incredibly gracious, and they stand there, and you get to chat for 30 seconds, and they take your picture, and then you move on. So I brought my mom to this twice, and she's kind of she's a piece of work, So the first one was with President Bush. I think it was 2006, and you walk in, and I mean, it's particularly because the reporters are bringing their family or friends or spouses, and the guests are new to this, most of them. So it's a pretty awesome environment, and you walk through, and then you get into this room. This is the diplomatic reception room, and you're 5 feet away and then 4 feet away. And then this military aide comes up and looks at the card you filled out and says, okay, Mr. Feller, and this is who to you? This is your mother? Okay. Is it Mrs. Webb? Okay, right. Now here's how this is going to work. I'm going to introduce your son, and he's going to step forward, and then I'll introduce you, and you come behind him, and then talk to the President and the First Lady, and then face this way, whatever. So that's all well and good, but he says, Mr. President, Ben, and my mom just takes off. It goes right up. And she's like, Mr. President, it's so good to meet you. Thank you for doing this. What a lovely house, This is all true. And then she's like, do you know my son? And it was a legitimate question in the sense that I had just started on the beat, and that day, about 2 hours earlier, I had asked my first question of the president at the Pentagon. And it's funny even telling these stories about how all these chapters kind of run together, because that was about the Iraq War, and the President Bush was going through the same kind of review that I talked about earlier with President Obama, and he was trying to figure out whether to send in more troops or not, and this was right before the surge, and I said, I asked him, have you heard any ideas at all that affect your thinking or something like that? Have you heard any good ideas that would change your opinion? And so this was right after that, and she's like, do you know my son? He's like, of course I know your son, AP man, He didn't really know my name yet, but he called me AP man. He's like, why wouldn't I know him? He was standing 10 feet in front of me like an hour ago, And she's like, oh, okay. And then, but then he was, charming to her, and the First Lady was too. So then we get to this one, and my mom is, sort of very timid. And she's like, what did I do wrong last time? I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm sure nobody here remembers. And she's like, well, what should I do differently? I'm like, well, just listen to the military aide and do whatever he says. That works. So went through the whole same rigmarole, and this time she didn't run up. I went first, and President Obama, coincidentally, had just taken my question about 2 hours earlier also, and it was during that lame duck period where he was trying to get the tax deal passed, and I had asked him, he was trying to defend why he extended tax cuts for the rich, as he puts it. And I said, why should the American believe you when you campaign against something and then you take the opposite stand? Why should they think you're not a flip-flopper or something like that? And so then this happens, And he comes up and he goes, Ben? And he says, started things off today. And he just trailed off. I'm like, started things off today? I'm like, what does that mean? It means that's about all you want to say. It reminded me of when people would see my stories in the newspaper and be like, sorry, story today. I'm like, and then just stop. I'm like, okay, that's not good. You're just acknowledging you know who I am, or So I said, yeah, well, it was I thought that was good. That's healthy. Here's my mom. So then he snapped back out of it, and everything was fine. So I get, the picture comes back from the White House, and they send you a little JPEG, and I sent it to my mom. I said, what do you think? She's like, I really like this picture. I don't like a lot of pictures of me, but I like this picture. She's like, what do you think? I'm like, yeah, I like it too. It's a nice picture. And she's like, oh, it's just so funny how I'm standing. I said, what do you mean? She's like, well, look at me. I'm just so careful. I'm so rigid. I said, no, you look fine. She's like, but my arms are straight down. I'm like, oh. She's like, why? Where are your arms? I'm like, my arms on the First Lady. Is it not supposed to be? Everything seemed fine, Oh, yeah, I almost forgot about this story. So this is the night that the White House correspondents all get together and throw a big dinner, basically for us, White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's coming up in a couple weeks. And it has definitely some merit to it. It raises money for scholarships, I believe, is one of the key components. And, the president comes, and he's kind of roasted, and then he roasts us, and it's a fun night. But this particular night, I had won an award, and so you got to go into a little VIP room. And we didn't expect this, but they stood up there and did a receiving line. So I walk up, and that's my now wife, Elizabeth, and we're just about to get up there, but standing right in front of me is the actor Alec Baldwin. And he's kind of got a commanding presence. So we're now like 5 feet away. He's right in front of us, and the president goes, hey, Alec, how you doing? He's like, honey, you remember Alec? We were just watching his movie last night. It's complicated. I love that movie. You're such a talented actor. And I'm like, So they take their picture, and I walk up, and he's like, Ben, how you doing? Congratulations. I said, thanks. He goes, how you feeling? I'm like, I was feeling pretty good till a minute ago. And he's like, what happened? I'm like, well, I just followed Alec Baldwin. He's like, you got more juice than that guy. So we're laughing about that. I'm like, all right, thanks for picking up my ego. And we look over, and my fiancée, Elizabeth at the time, now wife, was talking to the First Lady. And she had asked Elizabeth, have you picked out a dress? And Elizabeth's like, well, and this is where we picked up the story. She's like, it's kind of like Ben, you know? I think so. I got it down to like 2, but I'm not really sure. And the president's like, so it's down to Ben and another guy? And I'm like, no, man, it's just me. Look at the ring. What? I'll see you at the dinner. So, anyway, we got married. It's working out. It's working out. So, to sum all this up, I guess what I want to say is that, to go back to a point I made earlier about the way people who stand on Pennsylvania Avenue and look at the White House, I see this every day. They look inside the gates and they just kind of have this appearance of awe and wonderment, and they're just like, well, is he home, and what's going on? And then people like me come out of there to go get a cup of coffee or something, and they look at them like, well, am I supposed to know you? I'm like, no, you're not supposed to know me. But they're like, well, you know, people can just walk in and out of there, and they just want to be able to feel it somehow and get in and figure out what it's like. And then when I leave at night, and I often don't leave feeling as sort of upbeat as I'm describing it tonight, because it's such a hard job, and we often don't succeed in getting the information that we want about what the president's going to do, why he did it, who he met with, why it's important. So it's a constant battle for information. And I walk out of there some nights feeling sort of like I lost that battle, and yet I'm always reminded when I see the families and the tourists, and they're just, you know, they're not worried about kind of like what the story was today. They just want to know what the White House is like. And it's a good reminder for me every day about how special the job is and the kind of privilege it is to be able to cover the White House. And there are a lot of us in there who take it very seriously. We're passionate about accuracy. We're passionate about covering the president fairly regardless of party, and we're just really passionate about journalism. And that's how I feel about it. So hopefully I've conveyed that to you tonight. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to take a few questions if anybody's interested on any topic.
There was a time when Helen Thomas had a privileged status in the White House press corps, and I wonder if you can shed any light on what happened when the Bush administration came in and suddenly she didn't. Secondly, did you have any access to Vice President Cheney?
The second one's an easy one to answer because it's no. Well, I'll stay on that topic. I picked up the White House beat in the last 2 years. So part of my initial challenge was just to get to figure out who these folks were. And, you know, they're 6 years in. They're not running for re-election, but they're still in control of the country. The war was very divisive. And so I just had to kind of get my feet in and figure out how to cover the place. And that was with people who did provide some access. Vice President Cheney his office was very hard to penetrate, not just because of the politics at the time, it was just kind of the attitude. I mean, he let the president, run the White House, and everything flowed from that. So he didn't give very many interviews, and the AP at the team that I work with, we had some success with his staff. But, I didn't have any direct access to Vice President Cheney, unlike President Bush, who I feel like I got to know pretty well. Similar answer, I guess, on Helen Thomas. Her career changed, dramatically. I mean, in one level, she's an icon and was a pioneer. And a lot of people know her for that and sort of standing up and asking questions the way I showed you from the front row, and she was the senior wire service reporter and made a lot of history that way. And then, I can't speak with tremendous authority about the arc of her career, but I know that her job changed and her writing changed, and she became a columnist and very strident about that. And so both to President Bush when I was there and also President Obama before she left, she would ask questions that weren't just about defending her position. They were her taking a position, but she still commanded a lot of respect, and presidents, called on her. But her role definitely changed in terms of being an advocate. And then, more recently, she made some comments that were, widely seen as anti-Semitic and fell out of favor with the profession and the White House Correspondents Association, among others, and lost her position on that, or resigned her position. I'm not exactly sure how that went. And, I think she still is writing. I'm not sure where she's landed now. But so she's had a long career, but it's had different chapters to it, is the best way I guess I would sum that up.
With the news media, the print media and the TV networks cutting back on their journalism coverage, do you see much difference in the way the White House is being covered? And a related question, I believe there's some bloggers now in the press room, and how is that all working out?
On the first question, I think those of us who are there every day, we're essentially covering it the same way. So in the case of the AP, we're trying to break news. We're writing very fast to get that initial burst of news out. And then we try to write the story in a fuller way that has a lot of context, that's written well, and deserves to be on the front pages of America's papers and across the world. So, and we're doing what I just said across many, many stories at once. So it's not like a sort of an older model where you focus on the one story. We're chasing all kinds of news because that's how the White House works. But there are reporters and I think in the aggregate, the field of journalism has changed in the sense of covering the White House because there are just fewer resources. So some outlets don't send anybody to cover the White House, or if they do send anybody, it's just one, or they don't send them on trips. Sometimes the president will take a trip, and I'm there, one of my colleagues from the AP is there because we're always with him, and so we're in the cabin of Air Force One, but there's no accompanying press plane to take all the other networks and all the other print reporters, and I guess the bottom line on that is that no plane goes if there's not enough interest among the reporters, and that's often driven by, sometimes by news, if they know it's not going to be worth it to go all the way to Arizona for a 1-hour fundraiser, but often it's driven by economics. I mean, those charter planes can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and it's just not a given anymore. So it can be harder to measure, but it's just generally not a good thing if you have fewer eyes and fewer ears on the presidency, because some of those reporters look at different angles, or they localize stories, or they dig in deeper where other reporters might not have time. So we all want more coverage.
And a question about...
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I sort of am old school in this way. Even, I've been at this, I think, 18, 19 years, and, I sort of came through the newspaper model, small newspaper, medium, and large newspaper, and then I came to work for the Associated Press in Washington, covering education, and then to the White House. And I've always hopefully been successful by kind of focusing on the journalism. And I've always found an avenue for it. And now, working for the AP, our stories go everywhere, which is a terrific feeling, but it's a great responsibility. So that's kind of how I've done it. And then along that whole arc, there has been a change in the media that, the internet wasn't a tool when I started, and then it became one, and then, everybody was communicating by email instead of phone, and then, blogs became popular, and now Facebook and particularly Twitter all of a sudden is becoming not just a social medium, but a news-making medium. That's how senators are issuing their statements, and the White House is announcing news. So, all of this kind of happens around me, and I intersect at points, but I think a lot of blogs are very well read, and they're avenues for people to get out a different side. And again, I think that's a good thing. I think it kind of depends on the blog. If somebody comes out of an event and there's a news story, and then there's a network piece, and there's different blogs from different parts of the spectrum all have their take on it, I think that's a good thing. Sometimes, blogs can I've seen cases where blogs have gotten things wrong, and, the response will be like, well, come on, the standard's different. And that bothers me, because I'm like, well, if you're going to report on it, then you have to attribute it, and it has to be right. But generally, I think all these different sources, they're all trying to get out news and information and viewpoints, and that's a good thing.
Would you compare and contrast your experiences with President Bush and President Obama with respect to how well they seem to listen to your question, how directly or indirectly they respond to the questions, whether you get any feedback through any mechanism after you've written a story, and how they let you know whether they're happy or unhappy with what you wrote?
Well, actually, I'm sort of heartened by the fact that the two presidents I've covered have been very similar in the fact that they'll take a question and they do respond to it. I think partly because they know that's just the expectation at a news conference. I mean, it's a pretty stubborn thing to call a news conference, invite the press, call on somebody particularly to take a question, hear the question, and not answer it. You know, there are a lot of times we ask them questions and they don't answer. You know, in the Oval Office, like one of those scenes I said earlier, we'll shout a question, what about Libya? You know, are you going to start war? And, you know, they just wave us off. But when they actually call on us, I thought both presidents have been very consistent and thoughtful about answering. Now, what they usually will do, and President Obama, because this is freshest on my mind, has a kind of an uncanny way of doing this. He'll say, well, look, you know, and then he'll walk you through, you know, the economy that he inherited and what he had to do at the beginning, you know, and then, you know, the numbers started to turn around. And now we're in a position to, you know, take on the bigger issues. And I'm like, well, we know all that. And I know all that because I've heard you say it 100 times. And he'll look at me and he's like, now, with respect to your point, you know, and then and just when you think he's like, what, you know, he's never going to answer the question, he does. And sometimes his answer will prompt a follow-up question, or he might not answer like a specific point. The day on that healthcare question I asked him about, is he going to step in and give some direction to Congress, because that was the issue. He was just sort of being secondary. And he said, well, I don't want to do this, but I will do this. And I said, is it your job to get this done? And he said, well, and he didn't really answer that. And I shouted, is it your job to get this deal done, healthcare? And he said, yes, I'm the president. And eventually he thought that and saw that and went and lobbied to the end to try to get the bills passed. So in that sense, I think they're similar, and I've found good luck. I think in terms of your question about feedback, we usually don't get that at the presidential level or even like the chief of staff. It usually comes from the press shop. And, you know, if they're not happy with the story, they'll let you know. But again, there's kind of an expectation, like, it can't just be, well, that's not how they would have written it, or, you know, you should emphasize all the good we're doing. I mean, because we don't work for them. And they know that. I think that they get that. It's got to be a little bit more of a specific criticism, you know. You've left out this key point, or, you know, you guys you guys keep selling this narrative of he's not engaged, but we gave you information that says X. Couldn't you at least include that? You know, maybe that kind of. And, you know, that actually doesn't happen that often, but if it does, my instinct is to say, like, well, what do you think is missing? You know, I mean, I have an interest in being comprehensive too, as long as you're going to be fair about it. If ultimately they're just kind of angry about a story, but they can't really articulate it, they're just not having a good day, you know, that's not my problem.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. My question is related to the other ones asked before. How do the press corps members get invited to go on a certain trip? Like when you went on Air Force One, the Asian trip, that was like over a week trip. The second part of the question is that do the same people get invited, or they rotated, or what? Is there a criteria? And the little small part of that question is, I observed in that Air Force One, when President Obama was talking to the press, I noticed only there were 2 females. They were all males in the room. Is there some way how they pick the people who to go? Yeah. They have a choice of.
Well, the White House doesn't choose who goes on the trips. That's up to each individual news outlet to decide who to send. So the way it works on Air Force One is that press pool is, I think it's 14 members. That's how many seats there are back there. And so there's 3 wire services, the AP, Reuters, and Bloomberg. Always there, always in the same seats. Now, those news organizations independently decide who to send on a trip. And since I'm involved in that for the AP, sometimes it's a matter of somebody's going on this trip because they have a particular interest in it, or the editor wants us to go, or I'm the chief correspondent, so I'll go on the bigger trips, like the foreign trip I would do. But there are trips all the time, and so sometimes it just might be who's free to go to San Diego next week. Someone's like, well, I'm on vacation, or my daughter's graduation is that day, so it's just more practical. So that kind of how it breaks down to a granular level. And then, like I said, that's just the pool. The press corps can go also with him, and they charter a plane and split the costs. And that's a trip-by-trip decision. Basically, the press corps will email itself, the White House press corps, and say, who's up, who wants in, And that's a news judgment decision. Is it going to be worth our time and our money to go on this trip? And what are we going to get out of it? And then, they decide. So I'm not really as involved in that because we're always on Air Force One. As far as the lack of a female representation, I mean, it's kind of a consistent problem. I don't know how well I could speak to it. It's just that there are often times when that room is predominantly male, and it gets commented on. But it has nothing to do with the White House or any sort of forces in that room. It's just as it stands right now, it's a kind of uneven distribution. So again, to the degree it's discussed in there, I don't think anybody's particularly happy about it. I mean, there have been times when I've been there have been no women on the front row. But it's kind of a larger question that I guess I don't have a great answer to. Sir?
Mr. Fowler, I'm concerned with safety. In your experience working with Mr. Bush and President Obama, both, you mentioned access to Dick Cheney. Now, you all have access to the president. When all of you get together in that room where they have the press conference, does the Secret Service make you pass through some machine to get in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you can't even get into the White House, let alone a room within the White House, without going through a lot of security. So every day when I show up to work, I come in basically the front gate of the White House off Pennsylvania Avenue, and I show what they call the hard pass. It's a permanent pass. And the only reason I have that pass is because I've gone through extensive Secret Service clearance. So that's just the start. And then I hold the pass up, and they buzz in a gate door. I go in there, and then there's this bulletproof heavy door that they have to buzz open. So that's the second step. Then I go in, and I take off my work bag, and it goes through a belt like at an airport. And I take my pass, and I put it up against a coding machine. Recognizes it. I have to put a 4-digit pin in. That triggers a turnstile. I go through the turnstile and a metal detector. If anything goes off, then I get wanded. Then I get to get my bag, go out, and walk down the driveway where snipers are looking at me. That's to get in.
Well, I remember when this couple crashed the White House party not too long ago. How about when you go into Air Force One? You saw that picture when you're more like informal there. Yeah. How do they check you there? Does the Secret Service check everybody there too?
Very similar deal. At Andrews Air Force Base, if I'm going on a trip, you drive yourself there, you pull up and you show the press badge, and that kind of gets you in the first gate, and then you go to the terminal. You go through the same kind of screening I just talked about, and then you sit in a room, and everybody puts all their belongings on a belt, and they bring in dogs, and they sniff every single thing you have, and they hand wand you. And then you're, quote, clean. So then you can be on the plane. I mean, at some level, they've screened you as much as they can. They need the staff and the press to go on the trip. So, but even there, it's not like they sort of stop. I mean, the Secret Service sit right in front of us. They're always watching. Those are the ones we can see. And I'm sure they're doing all kinds of other things that we're not aware of. And then if somebody breaks protocol and says just goes to the bathroom and comes back without being escorted, then they're not deemed clean anymore because you don't know where they've been or what they've been past. So then either they have to get rescreened or, depending upon the circumstance, everybody else does. So there's a constant vigilance there.
Even though you recognize that people know you,
yes,
people still check. Even at that
always.
The scene you show with Mr. Bush in China, that was more informal. Will you check them before you approached President Bush?
Again, there we had been screened. To be with him. We had gone through all of those steps and then gotten in the motorcade. Yeah. And then so then you're with him basically, and the van is been swept. So at that point, there's really no other screening that needs to be done. I mean, they could always, if they wanted to, do one more, but it's, that's his senior staff calling a member of the press corps who's already gone through security to come over and sit next to him. So.
Well, thank you very much. That explains what you said.
Sure.
Because it's
Yeah,
important.
we never get a pass on that one. Never.
Two questions, if I might, please. First of all, what did you write and how did you feel after that night at Dover Air Force Base with the President? And secondly, I wonder if you have had occasion where you've been in the press room and there's a special issue that you know is going to be discussed and you've had an opinion about it yourself, and if after hearing then from either the President or the press secretary, if you've ever had occasion to change your mind then based on that.
Well, I'll take that second one first. This is something that actually bothers my mom, to bring it back to my mom, because she's like, I just want to know what you think. She's like, I just want my son back. I'm like, I'm right here, Mom, but I don't have an opinion on everything. Some people live their lives that way, So so what I have an opinion about is what the President has said and what he's done, and digging into that and holding him accountable. So when the President campaigns, we cannot raise taxes this way. And then he loses a midterm election and his power is stripped and he's at a tiny window to get a deal done and says, well, I'll give ground on that, but we need to make sure that taxes don't go up for the middle class and we get unemployment insurance, and says, this is a good deal. I said, well, you can sell it as a good deal, but I come into that with a point of view in the sense that I know what you said, and I know now what you did, and I'm going to be the one to hold you accountable, or try to. So that's where my point of view comes in. But it's based on the journalism of it. I don't come into that with a point of view about whether taxes at a certain rate should go up or not, or whether unemployment should run out at 96 weeks or not, or whether the President should step into a budget fight in Wisconsin. I just don't. I mean, it's how I think, it's how I trained, and I just take it too seriously. And some people will say to me, like, well, you have to. I mean, you're human. I'm like, well, no. I mean, do you have an opinion about all these different public policy issues? All of them? I mean, we go in there, and what we have is our credibility and our accuracy. And I like to think President Bush would describe, to the degree he remembers who I am, would describe me the same way President Obama would, which is, yeah, he's fair. He gets it right. I don't always like his, questions, but I see where he's coming from. So I can't really say that they've kind of, changed my opinion. I've come out of there sometimes and thought, out of a news conference or briefing, and thought, well, that helped. That was good. I mean, now we got more. Everybody won in that. I mean, he got to have his say, and we asked good questions, and the American public got more information, and that was good. And other times I'm like, well, we just heard his talking points, and he didn't particularly like our questions, and the stories aren't as good because you don't have that much to work with. So that's, I guess, the closest I've come to sort of feeling one way or the other coming out of there. I'm sorry, I forgot your other question. About Dover. Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
About Dover.
The Dover story, I don't have it in front of me, but the key thing to remember from that was that I had gotten back, and it was about 5 in the morning, and my first story had run at midnight. News alert, President Obama goes to Dover Air Force Base to greet the remains of fallen soldiers. And it was very straight that way. He went here, here's why. It comes at a time when he's thinking about sending more troops to war. This is because of a change in policy that allows the media to see it. So by the time I got back, that story was 5 hours old. And what we like to do is, at some point once you've gotten the news out, is to write it in a way that kind of captures the whole day. But at that point, sort of in between as a writer, because I had the news out, and it was sort of getting dated in one sense. But in the other sense, a lot of people had never seen this story because they were sleeping when this happened. So I took an indirect approach that I think the lead was standing in the pre-dawn darkness, President Barack Obama saw the real cost of war, the Americans who come home in coffins while much of the country sleeps in peace. Because that's what it felt like. And that's what happened. And then I described how it was dark and cold, and he got to feel this for the first time face to face. And President Bush spent a lot of time with families, but he never went to Dover. He didn't think that was the way he wanted to honor the families. And President Obama, wanted to do this. And I said, at a time when he's considering sending more troops, maybe 40,000, maybe more, he saw that the number that really counts is one, and that was this one soldier, Dale Griffin, who came back. And so that's how I approached it. I tried to capture what it felt like and what the moment was to him. And actually, he called that the most important moment of his first year in office. That one moment, and that was an incredible statement when I read that, because of everything that happened in the first year. I mean, getting it went on and on. The stimulus and the war, and but that was what stuck with him. So I felt proud to cover that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the context of the press conferences, you made reference to the clash between what you might want to ask, what the press corps wants to ask, and what the administration might want to tell you.
Right.
In the context of the Iraq War, there's a sort of a minority in the country that felt like the press let the administration off easy with the Iraq War and didn't ask the hard questions. I think particularly of the reporting of the number of Iraqis killed. I mean, that was a minor story, but we really didn't hear much about that. Do you struggle, and do your colleagues struggle, I'm sure you do, but I don't know how much you want to talk about it, with is that an okay question to ask? In the context of many people feeling like the press let the administration off easy during the Iraq War, were there things that you just felt like we really can't go there?
Well, for me, I would say that the struggle is not whether or not this is an okay question to ask. The struggle is, how am I going to get that information so to the degree there were mistakes made, we don't make them again. So there's a new campaign forming, and these wars are all different, so you can't compare. But going into Libya, we start to think, well, how do we know you're arming the rebels? Well, who are these people? How do we know? How do you know? Why should we believe you? You say the U.S. is backing out of a lead role, but you're not saying when we're getting out. We're still providing support and sending missiles. So you try to think critically about how can you get the information. How do you assure readers that the information that we're being told, the intelligence particularly, is accurate? I think the government has a much higher standard now of credibility to prove because of the Iraq War, and I think the press definitely feels that every day too. I don't know that I've had a time where I thought, boy, I'd really like to ask this, and it's very, it's provocative and it's important, but I just don't know that I can pull it off. I mean, well, I guess the best example I could think of is President Obama took a trip to Russia, and right before he left, he was asked about Putin and whether Putin was basically the leader of the country, even though Medvedev was the president. And President Obama said something like, Putin needs to learn that the Cold War is over. This is off the top of my head, so forgive me. Putin needs to learn that the Cold War is over, and he's sort of got one foot in the present and one foot in the past. So, we'll have to see. So then we go to Russia, and we're in the Kremlin in this incredible room. I mean, just this imposing hall. And I got called on, and I said, as President Obama stood next to President Medvedev, I asked him something like, have you decided in your mind who runs this country, Putin or the guy standing next to you? And Medvedev gave me a look, and the press secretary sent me an email. He's like, your emails are going to be checked tonight, because we were in Russia. So I think that was, but I wasn't trying to be sensational. It was, that was the question hanging over this trip, is the leadership debate, because he was just starting to meet these folks on their own turf and on their own terms, and he had basically set the predicate. I've got to go there and find out. So it was a fair question.
Did he answer?
Yes, he did answer. He said there's a governmental system here, and President Medvedev is the president, and I have I believe him, and I'm going to work with him. And then he said something about, Putin has his role too, but it was very, very kind of straight, methodical.
Last question.
Hi. It's funny that was the question that was asked, because this one is going to be very much similar. How do you and your colleagues, all of the politicians, all of the statesmen, how, when you're in the middle of an inane situation, do you stay so poised and politically correct, and how does everybody in that situation not just come out and talk about the insanity of the situation at times?
Well, if I talked about it then, what would I say here? I guess sometimes when those sort of inane moments are happening, that's not when we're right in front of them. I mean, normally, I think the stagecraft happens at a very serious moment. And so you sort of ask questions that are kind of commensurate with that moment. I guess, I was at the White House on Friday night until 1 in the morning. And that was the third night I was there past midnight covering this shutdown story. The government reached a deal to keep the government running at 10:30 in the night, an hour and a half before deadline, right? So it would have affected millions of people. I don't think most people would agree that that's a good way to run the government. I think that's a fair statement, right? Now, you might not agree with what the deal was or who gave in to whom, but, but I didn't have a chance right then to say to the president, what the hell? And of course you want to ask something that's respectful and representative, but I would probably the next morning have had a chance to say something, a better version of that, because if you campaign on bringing new politics to Washington, and of course there are many parties to that, but it's a fair question. So I hope that we always do come across as poised in that environment, because we're part of that scene too. I mean, we want to reflect well on our news organizations and our peers and what we do. So it should be poised and professional. It doesn't always work out that way. There are some times when you get frustrated, or funny things happen out of nowhere, or you're right in the middle of what you hope is an intelligent question, and a light bulb goes out, and you've lost your train of thought, and you just hope it'll help you out. But overall, it comes through a lot of practice. The level of thought that goes into, and preparation that goes into what to ask and how to ask it. I'll just go through and edit questions, and I think if I ask that, I know what he's going to say. I know exactly what he's going to say, and we're going to be right back where we started, so scratch that. But if I put it this way, hopefully he will have to expand upon what his doctrine is for example, Libya. What's your doctrine for military intervention? If you phrase it a different way, then just give me your principles, but why should we think this is different, or what are your beliefs? He tends to take the opportunity to answer.
And just one other. So when it actually occurs, when somebody actually goes, "Come on," what happens? What happens then?
You mean when somebody says that to him?
When somebody just cannot help themselves and they say, "You're kidding me." What happens?
It depends on the president. Obama would say, "Well, look." And President Bush would say, "Don't agree." And then everybody kind of moves on. And when those real moments happen, I think the vibe changes and the president's kind of roll with it. I think exasperation is fine if you just can't get an answer. Right? If you're just trying to get an answer to a question, that's fair. But if you're just trying to say, you guys are doing this and I can't believe it, well, that's not our job. You know what I mean? That's not, you can see that as a viewer and say, I can't believe, but our role is to be fair and hold them accountable as best we can, and to get them information. If you think these guys, they said one thing and they're doing another, that's fine. But that's, we don't cross that line, I guess, and show that exasperation or even feel that exasperation sometimes. Sometimes we do. We try. Thanks, everybody. Does that mean you will welcome a Penn Stater back? Thank you.
We didn't get a chance to show him Michigan Stadium this time, but next time when he comes, we're going to walk him into that vast stadium and show him what a real stadium looks like. Anyway, you can see from the thoughtfulness of his answers why he won this award. He won the award for his writing, but what has impressed me with Ben and with other of the journalism award winners we've met is how passionate they might have come across as very, very critical, whether of national defense or the presidency at a certain time, but how when they have stood at this podium, how reasoned and thoughtful and what great representatives of journalistic principles they hold. So we thank you, and for you, we have a gift, which is a pen set with Gerald Ford, our favorite president's signature. So
Thank you.
Use in good health.
Thank you. Thank you.